So I got introduced to Ray of Hope at a really unusual time in my life. I was 50. I'd had my first management job working for a Danish company, and was a Canadian business unit manager, and the company reorganized, and I ended up downsizing all of our Canadian operations over the course of a year. And my wife kept going, you know, like, what about your job? And I went, oh, you know, they need me. I'm the only guy that knows anything about this. And I spent a year crisscrossing the US and doing all kinds of stuff, and walked into a meeting one Monday morning expecting, you know, my boss, who was the vice president of sales in the US, to be there, but I wasn't expecting the vice president of human resources to be there. Was exactly right, because I'd gotten rid of everybody else. I kind of walked in and went, oh, it's my turn. I knew, right? I was going to be out of work at 50. And you know, so you go through that. I got to go home now and tell my wife and my kids that I don't have a job. I'm, you know, and it's a hard thing to go through as a male, as a father figure, as a provider, to kind of come home and share that news. And so for me, it became, well, I'll get another job. It was a long time. It was 9 months for me, and I actually ended up working in my church as the janitor for 5 months. But in that time frame, and then I ended up back in industry, but in that time frame, I had a gentleman come to me whose wife actually had nudged him one day and said, you know, you should talk to Harry about serving on the board at Ray of Hope. And so he kind of went, you know, you're right, that would be a good idea. And so he came to me and he said, listen, you know, would you consider serving on the board of Ray of Hope? And I said, what's Ray of Hope? I'd lived in the community for 14 years, gone to some really big churches, and you know, Ray of Hope's a Christian program, but I'd never heard of it. And so, but I kind of had one of those things where, you know, any door that opens, I'm going to say yes, and I'll walk through and see where it takes me. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of Ray of Hope working in KW. And not a lot of people know about it or what we do. That's been changing a bit over my tenure, but a lot of people don't. And that's because it started really to be a halfway house for young men coming out of prison at Guelph Reformatory. This was before a Young Offenders Act or Juvenile Delinquents Act. Young men as young as 16 were serving time in adult prisons. And the gentleman that founded Ray of Hope was a minister in a small church in Fergus, a gentleman called Harry Whyte, and he started going into the Guelph Reformatory to meet and to engage with prisoners there. And you know, he just had a real heartfelt compassion. I've got to do something to help these young men, because they're coming out of prison and it is so hard. It's still one of the biggest challenges I think anyone faces when they've been incarcerated for any kind of crime. Coming back into the community and finding your way back into the mainstream. That's why we have high recidivism rates. And so that was what Ray of Hope started about. And we had a farmer out in Petersburg donate 3 acres of land to build this nice bungalow out there to be a halfway house. Well, in 1972, they brought in the Young Offenders Act, and the province then went, oh, what are we going to do? We need to put these young people somewhere, and we have no place to put them. And so they came to Ray of Hope and said, would you become a transfer payment agency for the province and, you know, be a custody facility for young offenders? And so that's what Ray of Hope started with. And we've been a transfer payment agency since those days. So we take our good tax dollars and hire good people to support young people while they're being incarcerated or held for trial in our justice programs. And so we have a facility out in Petersburg that now is actually licensed for up to 20 young men. They would be young men that would serve 5 years at least for their crimes if they were adults. Most of them would involve assaults, weapons charges, some kind of violent charges. We've had young men serve manslaughter and murder charges out there. So they're not Sunday school kids, certainly, and it's a challenging place for your staff to work with. Youth justice has expanded into some other areas. We have a transitional education program for kids coming out of custody, kind of midterm, and to throw them back into a local high school would just be a disaster for them. And it really, so they can come and work on some educational credits with us in the midst of that. And then we also take kids going the other way. And it's gotten busier because the province changed the laws that the schools have to educate young people to 18 now, not 16. And so at 16, the school boards used to be able to say, I'm sorry, you're delinquent. Goodbye. We don't have to worry about you anymore. Well, now they have to look after them till they're 18. And it's really hard to, because these are kids that really don't want to be in school. They'd rather do something else. And so we'll take young people that the school boards kind of tried every potential program with them, and we will take them and put them into our school program. And in doing that, the biggest thing is to get them to show up. And so if you drop by every morning, there might be 8 or 10 kids registered, and there's probably 2 or 3 there at 9 o'clock. But then our staff are on the phone, kind of, where are you? What are you doing today? We'll come pick you up. Okay, we'll grab breakfast on the way in. And they start their day playing Skippo. Just, again, it's about building a relationship with these young people. But to help them get back to the point of, I'm ready to go back to school. I want to go back to school or do something different. And so then we have staff that just work with kids no matter where they're coming from to help them from reoffending. And that's called a reintegration program. So that's the youth justice piece of it. Several years ago, in 1996, Ray of Hope merged with another organization in the city called Oasis, and it was founded by a church and run by a church, and it was like a drop-in center in downtown Kitchener, off Market Lane and King Street at Scott, and it served meals, had laundry facilities for people, and that was has become the Ray of Hope Community Center now, and we've moved to a new building about 6 years ago, which is considerably larger, and so on any night, Monday to Friday, Ray of Hope's probably serving dinner to 250 people. And the drop-in opens at 3 o'clock, so people just kind of come in. So in our city, in our community, you have St. John's Kitchen, that's part of the working center. They open at 9 in the morning, and they are open till 3 in the afternoon. And then at 3 in the afternoon, we open our doors till about 10 o'clock at night. So it gives people a place to be. And like the drop-in is just that. It's hanging out, it's having coffee, it's playing cribbage, it's playing, we have a pool table. It's giving people a place to be and to belong. And then there's other services there. Part of what's associated with that is a food hamper program. And that's really changed a lot. It used to be just on a Thursday afternoon, the 100 or so people that were our chronically homeless people that were part of the community center would come in and they'd get a plastic bag with 7 or 8 food items. And the food closet was smaller than your front hall. When we moved to our new building, that's changed. And the dynamics have changed quite a bit as well, because now we have over 1,300 people registered to be part of our food hamper program. Almost 400 of them are children. Whereas we don't see 75% of those people don't come to Ray of Hope for a meal because they have a family, they have an apartment they're living in, but they're probably working 2 or 3 part-time jobs, if they're working, trying to make ends meet, and food stability is, next to housing stability, is one of the biggest pressures that they feel. And if you got to choose between paying rent or buying food, you really have to pay your rent first so you have a roof over the head, or your head and your family's head. And then you're stuck, how do I feed my family now? And so that's been an interesting dynamic for us as that's changed, as part of what we do is what we call community services and supporting people that are impacted by poverty. We also run a youth employment program. It's called Morning Glory Cafe, and we do catering out of our community center. And we used to have an old cafe on King Street that we had to shut down. But we work with, I don't know if you own a Toyota and you've ever been to Hefner Toyota, there's a Morning Glory Cafe at Hefner Toyota. They're just great community partners you see them sponsoring and supporting all kinds of things in our community. But they've been great partners with Ray of Hope and that program as well. And we're taking young people, probably 18 to mid-20s, that have really struggled to get started in life. Most of them haven't finished school. And we have a 6-month program for them where they spend the first 5 weeks kind of in a classroom setting with an employment counselor, learning some life skills, anger management. We talk about drug abuse, budgeting, a lot of different things that they've just probably never learned. That when you have a job, you show up to work on time, you show up when you're scheduled to work, you don't tell the boss where to take off and go because you think you know what you're doing better. Just some of those life skills that make them employable. And then they'll spend the next 10 weeks working within Ray of Hope's Morning Glory program, learning food preparation, safe food handling, those kind of skill sets, customer service. And then they spend the next 10 weeks with a business partner that Ray of Hope's building to have an additional work experience. And then the other youth piece that we do is the youth addiction services. And this kind of happened in my time at the board. It started to transition towards this. And what drove Ray of Hope towards this was you would get phone calls from parents going, I really need help with my son or daughter. We're just, I think they're involved with, just alcohol abuse, drug abuse, I describe it this way. If we had a room of 1,000 people and we asked them, how many people have had your son or daughter arrested and, you've had to go get them at the police station or they've gone to court and ended up serving time. And you get just a small, if everyone was honest, you'd get maybe 3 or 4 hands. It's not a big part of our population that end up in that far into the justice system. But nowadays, if you asked a group of 1,000 people, how many people in your family know a son or daughter, niece, nephew, grandchild that's causing no end of grief to their parents and their family because of their abuse of alcohol and drugs in high school and early 20s? Half the room puts up their hand now. That's how prevalent the drug problem is for families. And so we would get phone calls to Ray of Hope and they would go, can you help us? And the answer that Ray of Hope had at the time was, only if you have your son or daughter arrested. Because we were at the end of the road, not somewhere along the road. And so that was very intentional. And to be honest, I've sat in my living room with a police officer asking that same question about one of my sons. You could have him arrested, but do you really want to do that? Because it really changes the dynamics of your relationship forever. It's a hard place to be as a parent. And so we really felt we needed to do something more proactive. And so we ended up approaching our Ministry of Health, and a number of things came together, and this is before my time, where Ray of Hope got funding to start a residential youth addictions treatment program. And so in our city, in Kitchener, we have a 6-bed facility where we have young men aged 13 up to 17, 18 that will spend 4 to 6 months with us in treatment. We got additional funding to expand the program to be more community-based as well. And I describe it like this one, I had a stent put in my heart. And I think if we think about it, we all get told, participation, eat well, exercise, you keep your heart in great shape, and not all of us do that, right? So one day, you're sitting home and you tell your wife, when I go up and down the stairs at the office and I sit down at my desk, I feel this like someone's pushing on my chest, and it goes away. It's not pain, but it's just a pressure. And my wife, being the OR nurse, her eyes go out like this. And she goes, is your insurance paid up? Oh, you need to go see the doctor right away. So that led to me to, going to St. Mary's and, oh, wow, you have an artery that's 99% blocked, and ending up with a stent. I probably should eat better than I do and exercise more than I do, but, but for some people, even a stent doesn't work and you end up with, having bypass surgery. And for other people, their heart disease is so significant, they need a heart transplant. What you're really doing, if you look at the continuum of care for families with substance abuse issues in their family, is, residential treatment is the heart transplant. You're taking a young person out of the context of his family, his peers, and everyone else, because nothing else has worked, and you're putting them into this isolated therapeutic community where people are going to try and help him make some better choices and changes for his life. That's what residential treatment is. We also run something called day treatment. And I don't know if you've ever driven by the corner of King and Ottawa in downtown. You'll see this nice old building that was a bank, and it's got Ray of Hope on it. That's our day treatment facility. So young people will come to that facility. They'll not be in school. They'll come there through the day, Monday to Friday. It's really challenging to work with those young people because they can go home at night and use with their friends. They can do it on the weekend. But they're there at least because they recognize they need some help, and you're working with them in the midst of the struggle. And so that's what that's about. And then we have community-based treatment workers that just go and meet young people and their parents anywhere. And so we have a parent support group as well, because sometimes the parents are much more anxious to deal with this than a 13 or 14-year-old. 13, 14-year-olds just go, hey, I'm just having a good time. All my friends do it, right? So go away, don't bother me. And that's challenging, right? So we will work with the parents and help them to help their children to recognize what's going on in their lives. The latest thing that we've started in September, we opened Welcome Home Refugee Housing. Now, we were a landlord to that program for 10 years at our old cafe. When we sold the building, they lost that space as well. And then we worked with the community to kind of go, is this a program that's really needed? How does it really fit? And so we've started in on that. And we have a 15-room house in Waterloo over on Allen Street that was a former student residence. One of my sons actually lived in there when the guy actually built the addition on it. And so I'm somewhat connected to the house, and that's really kind of just starting up. Most of the people that we serve there are single refugees that arrive in the community. Now, most of the Syrian refugees that have come to our community have come as families, large families. And so the isolation that you feel as a family, there's lots of challenges when you speak no English, so you're really hard to find work. There's a lot of challenges, when you come as a family. When you come as a single person, those are multiplied, time and time again. Because now I don't even have a family to relate to. I've left that family, or that family's maybe been killed. So we really focus on taking and helping individuals. And so we have a family unit, but then we have these 2 5-bedroom units where we have 4 single males and 4 single females that will live in that unit, with an intern who actually lives 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with refugees. And so it's a really interesting and changing dynamic for us. But we got into that because we recognized that most of the people coming to our food hamper were former refugees or immigrants that are still struggling with poverty. We recognized in our youth justice programs that if we look through the history of the global conflicts and crises in the world, we ended up with young people from those areas who were refugees from Bosnia and Herzegovina, refugees from the Sudan, refugees from Ethiopia. They ended up in our community, they ended up in gangs, and they ended up in our justice system. And so, our focus is, how do we change that? How do we, again, maybe be more proactive and intervene?